Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a lovely day today. It's a very gloomy and rainy and just like Sweeney Todd weather kind of day here. I don't mind it. So yeah, I didn't end up uploading last week. Lockdown stuff again, I don't want to keep talking about it. But basically, long story short, I've got to grab any kind of work that I can, and because this isn't my work yet, hopefully one day it will be, I obviously have to prioritise that, which I don't really want to do because I absolutely love filming these, but yeah, if work comes and it takes up my whole week, I can't do a video. So the quicker I get monetized on here and kind of get the ball rolling with that, the better. So I've been speaking to a few of you either in like direct messages or just in comments, and a couple of people actually said that they wanted to see me do more well-known cases, so I'm going to dabble in that a little bit. So I've got my cuppa all ready, grab yours, and let's get into today's case. So you might recognise this case because it's actually the case that inspired the films Scream. What like number of Scream films are they on now? I think there must be like 5. I don't know. But this story takes place in Gainesville in Florida, and it was in the 1990s. So it was August in 1990 and it was the start of a new semester in school. Obviously in September all the university classes would be going back into school and all the students were really excited to get back. They were moving into all the new accommodation, they were looking forward to it, they were getting all the new stuff for the year. So 17-year-old Christina Powell and 18-year-old Sonia Larson were 2 girls who were living together at the University of Florida. On August the 26th, the police got a call from the girls' families saying that they hadn't been able to reach Christina or Sonia for days, and Christina's car was still outside the apartment, but there'd been no sign of the girls. The police went to check in on the girls, but there was no answer at their apartment, so they let themselves in. When they went into the apartment, they found both of the girls' bodies. Sonia was found upstairs in a bedroom lying on the bed, and Christina was found downstairs in the living room. In the early morning hours of August the 24th in 1990, a killer had entered the girls' apartment. The killer had an automatic pistol and a K-bar knife, and he'd broke into the girls' apartment using a back door. When he got in, he saw that Christina was asleep on the couch, and he just looked over it for a while. He just stood over it and watched her sleep before going upstairs. He did the same with Sonia, who was asleep in her bed. He just stood over her and looked at her, and it said that he was thinking which girl he would rather have sex with. He decided on Christina, who was the girl asleep downstairs on the couch, so he killed Sonia first. He killed her by stabbing her once in the chest, then duct taping her mouth shut so she wouldn't make any noise and wake Christina up, who was still asleep downstairs. He carried on stabbing Sonia as she was dying and trying to fight him off, but after about a minute she lost consciousness and passed away. He went down to Christina where she was still asleep on the couch, duct taped her mouth shut and then duct taped her hands behind her back. He then cut Christina's clothes off and raped her. He then made her lie face down on the floor when he stabbed her in the back to kill her. I've heard some places too say that he went upstairs to Sonia again and raped her dead body because there were marks that she'd been like pulled down the bed to the very end of the bed where she was found. He also cut off Christina's nipples to keep as trophies. I don't know how messed up you've got to be to do any of this, but that is just like so many steps too far. And when Christina was found, she was posed in a sexually suggestive position. Just 9 hours after the bodies of Sonia and Christina were found, the police were asked to check another girl's apartment. 18-year-old Krista Hoyt was late for her shift, which she was never late for. Krista was studying chemistry and she wanted to be a crime lab technician, and she had a midnight shift that night at the sheriff's department, and it just wasn't like her to be late. The police were immediately concerned, obviously, after having found 2 other girls who were kind of the same description as Krista. When they knocked at her door, there was no answer, so they looked through a window, and I watched an interview with an officer from that day who found Krista's body, and he said that he was looking through the window and the Venetian blinds were like slightly lifted. He said it felt like his mind was playing tricks on him because it looked like she didn't have a head, but he was completely right, she didn't have a head. She'd been left like slumped forward, sat on the edge of the bed, and her head had been cut off and placed on a shelf opposite, looking at her own body. And again, Krista's nipples had been cut off, but this time they were placed next to her. She was fully laid out for show. The day before, on August the 25th, the killer had got into Krista's apartment by prying open the back door with a screwdriver. Krista wasn't home, so the killer sat in and waited. At around 11 in the morning when Krista got home, he'd got her in a chokehold. I just don't want to repeat it again if it's not necessary, but he did exactly the same as he did to Christina. But as I said before, he'd posed her body a lot more graphically. Is that a word? Graphic, yeah. Just absolutely sick. He's also cut her torso completely open from her breastbone to her stomach, and yeah, left her head looking at her own body. Obviously now there had been 3 murders within 2 miles of each other, and everyone was terrified. The girls were all around the same age and they were all petite, brunette, and everyone was just scared. They were all, going around in groups, trying to stay together, sleeping in the same room. They were like combining houses and not going anywhere alone. But just the day after, the killer struck again. On August 27th at 3 in the morning, the killer broke into the apartment of Tracy Pauls and Manny Taboda. They were both 23 and they were really good friends. Tracy was the homecoming queen and Manny was a football star. I don't think they were in a relationship, I just think they were really, really good friends. He had the exact same weapons as he had the other nights, and he also used the same way of getting into the apartment as he did with Krista. He pried the back door open with the same screwdriver. As the killer was sneaking around in the house, he came across Manny first, and Manny was quite a big dude, but he stabbed him as he was asleep. He woke up as he was being attacked and was trying to fight the killer off, but he wasn't able to. Obviously, he'd struck when he was asleep, so he'd already got a big stab wound to the chest. There's not much you can do after that. So unfortunately, Manny just got stabbed multiple times in his arms, his hands, his face, and he was trying to protect Tracy as well. Obviously, he knew that Tracy was probably still in another room and he was trying to, look after the pair of them, but he wasn't able to, and unfortunately Manny passed away. Tracy heard a struggle happening and went out towards Manny's room to see what was going on, and she got a glimpse of the killer, but she ran back to her room and slammed the door behind her. But unfortunately the killer just knocked the door down and went in and attacked Tracy. Again, exactly the same way as Christina and Krista. He ended by stabbing her in the back, posing her body and leaving. When the police went into Tracy and Manny's apartment, they said that there was just blood everywhere. Tracy was found right by the front door and Manny was found in the bedroom. The university cancelled classes for a week because everyone was just so frightened once again. They didn't want to go anywhere by themselves. They were all trying to stick together in groups. They didn't know who the next person was going to be that was attacked. Now that Manny had been killed as well, it wasn't a case of we all need to protect the small brunette ladies. It was a no one's safe now because this football star, who was a pretty big dude, has also been taken down by this person, so literally no one felt safe. Everyone was sleeping in shifts and making sure that someone was awake at all times. Tons of students who come to the university from another place, like another city, had all just gone home, just been like, I'm not staying here, went back home to their families to get away from all this. Thousands of these students left and around 700 never came back. It got to the point where everyone who lived in the area was buying guns, to the point where there were no guns left in any of the gun shops because people were that desperate to feel safe and to protect themselves because of all of these killings. Obviously the media was reporting on all of this, and that's when they give the killer the name the Gainesville Ripper. But they didn't actually know who the Gainesville Ripper was. They had no idea. There was a lot of rumours going around about who it could be, whether it was a teacher, a doctor, just someone who went to the university. They thought maybe he could have been a burglar and it was just a burglary gone bad, like he'd been seen, so he decided to kill the people who'd witnessed him doing it. The investigation started and they noticed that behind all of the houses there was either a really dark or a wooded area where they believed the killer was able to stand and to watch the victims for a long time to decide, when they would be out, when they'd be back, what time they went to sleep, just to be able to plan their attack. Obviously, Christina, Krista and Tracy's murders were really, really similar into how they'd been attacked. I know that Krista's body was laid out a lot more, gruesome. Sorry, Bambi wanted to join in. I think she'll probably go underneath the covers to keep warm. She wanted to get toasty and get back in bed. They were trying to find links between all the murders. Obviously, I've already said the girls looked alike. They were all petite with dark hair and around the same age. The way he cut the clothes off, he did like a single cut from the bottom and up and then out through the shoulders. It was always the same pattern of cutting the clothes off. And the girls' bras were always torn off. They were never cut. The killer was using gloves to cover any fingerprints, and he'd also washed Tracy and Christina's body before he left the crime scenes, so he wasn't in any kind of rush to get out. The blood pooling shown on Krista's body proved that she was actually decapitated several hours after she died, so she'd been like moved down the bed again and then decapitated. So he was staying with the murder victims for hours. Investigators didn't sleep at all. They were really determined to solve this case because everyone was terrified. They were terrified. They were able to confirm that a swab from Krista and a sample on Christina's underwear and a paper towel found near the scene that this killer was the same person, which I'm sure they already knew, but they were able to confirm this. They had a suspect list of 675 people, and they had to go through that list and ask if they would give hair samples and, blood samples and other samples voluntarily, just to be able to rule them out. One person that stood out a lot to the police was an 18-year-old called Edward Lewis Humphrey. Quite a few people had put his name forward as being a really suspicious person. Edward was known as quite a threatening person. He was always drawing attention to himself. He was always being very over the top and very loud. He would just openly talk about murdering people and about killing. He even went into a bank and said to one of the girls, "I've got knives at home that could flay the skin off your body." And why would you say that to someone? He was arrested on an assault charge and he was jailed. So many people were made up after he'd been put away because they were like, that's it. Gainesville Rip has been caught. Putting a threatening person away who'd assaulted someone, who'd been telling people they had knives and openly talking about murdering someone, you would be convinced that you'd caught the killer. But when they searched his apartment to try and find a murder weapon or any clues that linked him to the scenes, they didn't find a single thing. They did find though that in his apartment, they said half of it was really neat and half of it was really grungy with rubbish everywhere and it was just dirty, and it looked as though two people lived there, but they didn't. It was just Edward. There was no new evidence coming in. They were searching ponds and streams, Edward's apartment. Nothing new came of that search. 3 weeks after the murders, when more DNA had been tested and the results had come back, they found out that it wasn't just the two murders that were the same person, it was all three. And they also found out that it wasn't Edward. His DNA didn't match, so he was eliminated. One lead really stood out to the police, and it was a murder that had happened the year before in Louisiana. This was a triple murder, and the victims were Julie Grissom, who was 24, her 8-year-old nephew Sean, and her 55-year-old dad Tom. They'd been attacked in their home, and Julie had been attacked in a similar way to the other girls. She'd been posed as well, and fluid had been poured over her to try and get rid of any evidence. It was a really, really similar murder. The police suspected a man they described as a drifter called Danny Rowling, and he was known for bank robberies, for theft. So they started looking into robberies in the area. There'd been a bank robbery around the same time as the murders, and they said that the suspect had been chased off into the woods. And 2 weeks after the murders, on September the 8th, Danny Rowling was arrested after a botched robbery of a food shop. Because Danny was the suspected bank robber as well as the suspected murderer at this time, and they said that he'd been chased into the woods, the police wanted to look into the woods and they came across a small campsite. At the campsite they found a ski mask which had fibres that matched fibres caught in some duct tape at the third murder scene. They found Manny's blood on a pair of pants, and they found Krista Hoyt's pubic hair inside a sleeping bag. So they were like, okay, this is the killer's campsite, but is it Danny's campsite? And then they found audio recordings of songs and ramblings, and it was Danny's voice. They also found a screwdriver that they were able to look at, and it matched the exact pattern that the screwdriver that had been used to open the doors had left. Obviously they needed more DNA from Danny to be able to link him directly to the campsite and to the murders, so they went to visit him in jail where he was serving time for the robberies. They said that they'd need around 30 to 50 pubic hairs from Danny just to be able to look at them all and see if there was a match. And without missing a beat, Danny just pulled his pants down, put his hands down his pants and yanked out 2 fistfuls of pubic hairs and just said that ought to be 50. And sure enough, Danny's DNA was a match to the crime scenes, so they had their guy. Danny Harold Rowling was born on May the 26th in 1954. His mum and dad were called Claudia and James, and his mum was 19, but I wasn't able to find out how old his dad was. But he was born in Shreveport in Louisiana. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Danny's dad was absolutely one of the worst people I've ever read about. He was a cop, but he was also a Korean War veteran, and they think he may have had some kind of PTSD after his time in the war. But he massively took all of his problems out on his family. The first time Danny was beaten by his dad was when he was just 1, and it was because he wasn't crawling properly. In 1955, Danny's younger brother was born, but it apparently just got worse after that. Claudia, Danny's mum, tried to get out of the marriage multiple times, but she always found herself going back. And Danny was really struggling in school as well, which isn't surprising, which led to Claudia having a nervous breakdown. Danny's school counsellors said that he was suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. When Danny was 14, he was caught peeping in on a neighbour's daughter, which he was beaten for. In his teens, Danny received a guitar for Christmas, and that's what he spent a lot of his time doing, just singing hymn-like songs, and he also attended church. Unfortunately, Danny's mum was sent to hospital after she slit her wrists, and because of this, Danny turned to drugs and alcohol to try and cope with everything. Danny wanted to join the Navy, but they wouldn't take him on, so he joined the Air Force instead. I've heard that he left, and I've heard that he was kicked out, but either way it was because of Danny's drug use. In 1972 he'd left the Air Force and he decided to get married. And after he got married, him and his new wife had a daughter, but unfortunately Danny started abusing them just like his dad had abused him. He threatened to kill his wife, so she left him, and I'm so glad she got out when she did. In 1977 he raped a woman who looked like his ex-wife, and then even later in the year he killed a woman in a car accident. It was then that Danny turned to his bank robberies and to stealing from shops just to get some kind of money. And he did this in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama and Georgia. And he served jail time in these places too, but he broke out quite a few times as well. Danny did work, but he was fired quite a bit as well. And on one of the nights that he was fired was the night that he killed Julie and her family in Louisiana. In May of 1990, Danny went to visit his dad, where he shot him twice. His dad didn't die, but he lost an eye and an ear. Danny broke into someone's house and stole papers, and he used them to change his identity and to move to Florida. 2 weeks before the Gainesville killing spree, Danny had broken into a woman's house. This lady was called Janet Frake. Just like with many of the other girls, he tried to handcuff her, but the handcuffs wouldn't stay on, so he used duct tape. He taped Janet's eyes shut too, raped her, and then took her in the bathroom and raped her there again. Janet somehow was able to keep her cool through all this, and she was a big true crime fan. She'd read loads and loads of books, and she was able to speak to Danny like he was a friend and try and make him feel like she was okay with him being there. Years later in an interview, Danny said that he thought that there was some kind of connection between them. My dog is snoring. Because she was such a big true crime fan, she knew that she needed to get some kind of DNA in her house, so she hid a stained towel for the police to find in case anything happened to her, and she also gave Danny a beer so he would leave some prints and some, saliva on the glass. Janet just kept him talking, and Danny apparently even asked Janet if in any other circumstance would she like to date him. It's just so crazy. She said that she knew that something was massively wrong with him just by the way he was talking. Obviously he'd attacked her and raped her. Like, there's something wrong with you if you do that, but she meant like on top of that there was something not quite right with him as a person. In his interview as well, Danny said that he wasn't out to kill anyone that night, but he probably was. I think that Janet just outsmarted him. I don't exactly know how she got him to leave, but I'm so glad she did. She could have been the first murder victim. And Janet actually says that she doesn't know if she's the only living victim. There might be other people out there who haven't actually come forward. Even though after the murders they had Danny's DNA and it was a match, DNA wasn't as big as it is now. So they were worried that even though they had his DNA, the jury might not be convinced, so they needed more evidence. Danny had been apparently talking and bragging about the murders to everyone in prison, especially to his closest friend, if you want to call him a friend, called Bobby Lewis. I think Danny chose Bobby as a friend because he'd escaped death row, and I think Danny obviously wanted to escape that too. Like police do with a lot of killers, they wanted Danny to feel important, like he was in control, like it was a big show. They kind of allowed him to slightly call the shots with the way he was being interviewed because he would only answer questions through Bobby Lewis, and that slowed everything down a lot, but eventually he did admit to the murders and also to the Louisiana murders. On November the 15th, 1991, Danny was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of sexual battery, and 3 counts of armed burglary. On June the 9th in 1992, Danny entered a plea of not guilty on all charges. His defence was saying that he had the mental age of a 15-year-old. They were bringing up how hard his life had been, the abuse from his dad. His mum even spoke out in court and said how this had affected her and their whole family. His family had had a history of mental illness, so that was something else that they put forward in his defence. They also said that it was Danny's other personality called Gemini who committed these acts, and that he was the sadistic one, but Danny wasn't. Psychologists said that Danny did have a big personality disorder, but he also knew right from wrong. He knew fully well that what he was doing was a bad thing. There was no denying that. On February the 15th in 1994, Danny changed his plea to guilty on all charges, and he was given the death penalty. So I'm not too sure about how the death penalty works, but I do know that you don't just get marched, you don't get sentenced to death and then get marched straight to get your injection or whatever. So Danny served a lot of time in prison for the murders. So he was found guilty in 1994, and then on October the 25th in 2006 he was executed in Florida by lethal injection. 47 people went to watch the execution. His final meal was a lobster tail, shrimp, a baked potato, strawberry cheesecake and sweet tea. When he was asked if he had any final words, he sang a song which was him repeating the line, "None greater than thee, O Lord," and then he was executed. That is the case of the Gainesville Ripper, and that is the story that inspired Scream. It's one of those cases that is horrible because it's like a domino effect. So obviously Danny's dad was at war, which gave him problems, then he gave Danny problems, and then Danny obviously went on and murdered people. It's one of them. I don't feel sorry for Danny, but I just wonder what his life could have been had his dad not done this to him and made him this way to an extent. But also his dad may have been a much nicer man had he not have had to go to war. It's just a big horrible line of rubbish things, and now these poor families have had lives taken away from them, and it's just not worth it, is it? It's horrible. There's a memorial wall in Florida with all the victims' names on. I hope they're all remembered. I hope their families are all okay, and I'm so sorry that this happened to them. Thank you so much for watching. I upload a new true crime video every Sunday, and if you haven't followed me on Twitter and Instagram, then please do, because it's just nice to have people over there. Do you like to snuggle? It's a very chilly day, so we're gonna snuggle and edit this together. Obviously Bambi will be doing most of the work. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Say bye, Bam.